In the heart of London, where centuries of British tradition stand guard over one of the world's most famous residences, a moment of madness would forever change the life of one man who thought he could challenge the crown's most elite protectors. What happened in those crucial seconds outside Buckingham Palace serves as a stark reminder that some lines should never be crossed, and some uniforms command respect that goes far beyond mere ceremony. This is the true story of how one desperate act of aggression met its match against the unwavering discipline of those sworn to protect the royal family. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of the Mall as tourists began their daily pilgrimage toward Buckingham Palace. Among the crowd of excited visitors, families with cameras, and street performers, few would notice the subtle signs of heightened security that had become the new normal in modern London. The year was 2017, and the world had become a more dangerous place, with terror attacks and security threats making headlines across Europe almost weekly. James Mitchell had been walking the streets of London for 3 days straight, sleeping rough and growing increasingly desperate. At 28 years old, he had already burned through most of his life's opportunities. A series of poor decisions, drug addiction, and petty crimes had left him homeless and facing mounting pressure from dangerous people who didn't forgive debts easily. The £3,000 he owed to a local drug dealer wasn't just money anymore. It was the difference between living and dying, and the deadline was rapidly approaching. Mitchell's appearance reflected his desperate circumstances. His clothes were dirty and torn, his face unshaven and gaunt from days without proper food. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted constantly between the faces in the crowd and the imposing facade of Buckingham Palace ahead. In his mind, a plan had been forming, a plan born of desperation and clouded judgment that would prove to be catastrophically flawed. As he approached the palace gates, Mitchell studied the famous red-coated guards standing at attention. These weren't just ceremonial figures, despite what many tourists believed. The Queen's Guard, drawn from elite infantry regiments including the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards, and Welsh Guards, were highly trained soldiers with extensive military experience. Many had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflict zones around the world. Lance Corporal David Thompson stood at his post near the main entrance, his SA-80 rifle held in the traditional position across his chest. At 24, Thompson was a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Scots Guards. His military bearing was perfect, back straight, eyes forward, expression impassive. But beneath the ceremonial exterior was a soldier trained in urban warfare, counterterrorism, and close protection duties. The tourists moved around Thompson like water around a stone, most taking selfies and marveling at his stoic demeanor. Parents would pose their children next to him, testing whether they could make him smile or react. Thompson had learned long ago to tune out the constant chatter and movement around him while remaining hyper-aware of genuine threats. His training had taught him to identify suspicious behavior patterns, and something about the disheveled man lingering near the gates was beginning to set off alarm bells. Mitchell had spent the better part of an hour observing the guards' routines, looking for what he perceived as weakness or opportunity. In his drug-addled state, he had convinced himself that grabbing a guard's weapon would somehow solve his problems. Perhaps he could sell it, or use it to intimidate his creditors, or simply create enough chaos to escape his current situation. The logical flaws in this plan were invisible to someone whose judgment had been compromised by days of stress, hunger, and withdrawal. As the morning wore on, the crowd around the palace gates began to thicken with the usual mix of tourists and locals. Street performers had set up nearby, adding to the carnival atmosphere that surrounded the palace most days. A bagpiper played traditional Scottish melodies while children ran around chasing pigeons. The scene was peaceful, almost idyllic, but tension was building beneath the surface as Mitchell worked up the courage to act on his desperate plan. Thompson noticed the man's increasingly erratic behavior, but maintained his position according to protocol. The guards were trained to remain at their posts unless directly threatened or ordered to move by their superiors. However, Thompson's eyes tracked Mitchell's movements while his radio crackled softly with routine communications between the various security teams positioned around the palace complex. The palace security network was far more extensive than most visitors realized. In addition to the visible Queen's Guard, there were armed police officers, plainclothes security personnel, and sophisticated surveillance systems monitoring every inch of the palace grounds and surrounding area. The response time for any security incident was measured in seconds, not minutes, and The level of training among all security personnel was exceptionally high. Mitchell's hands were shaking now, whether from nerves, withdrawal, or hunger, he couldn't tell. The weight of his desperate circumstances pressed down on him like a physical force. In his mind, he ran through the scenario over and over, grab the rifle, create confusion, escape in the chaos. What he failed to consider was the lightning-fast reaction time of a combat-trained soldier, the immediate response of backup security, or the serious criminal charges he would face for even attempting such an act. The morning sun climbed higher, and the crowd grew larger. Street vendors began setting up their stalls selling Union Jack souvenirs and royal memorabilia. The normal rhythm of London life continued around the palace, but, for Mitchell, time seemed to be slowing down as his moment of decision approached. He had crossed a line in his mind from which there would be no return. Thompson's peripheral vision caught movement as Mitchell began walking purposefully toward his position. Something in the man's gait and demeanor triggered Thompson's threat assessment training. Without moving his head or changing his ceremonial stance, Thompson began calculating distances, response options, and potential civilian interference patterns. His finger moved imperceptibly closer to his rifle's trigger guard, while his radio earpiece crackled with increased chatter from the observation posts. The critical moment arrived at exactly 11:47 a.m. as Mitchell made his final approach toward Lance Corporal Thompson's position. The crowd around the palace gates had swelled to nearly 200 people, creating the kind of congested environment that security professionals dreaded. Families pushed strollers, tour groups clustered around guides, and individual tourists wandered freely, all creating multiple layers of potential obstacles and innocent bystanders. Thompson's training kicked in as Mitchell closed the distance. Years of military service had honed his ability to assess threats while maintaining complete composure. Through his peripheral vision, he tracked Mitchell's approach, noting the man's clenched fists, irregular breathing pattern, and the telltale signs of someone preparing for violence. Thompson's body remained perfectly still in the traditional guard position, but every muscle was coiled and ready to respond. Mitchell's heart pounded as he covered the final 20 feet. In his mind, the plan seemed simple: grab the rifle, push through the crowd, and disappear into the London Underground system before anyone could react. What Mitchell didn't understand was that he was walking into one of the most sophisticated security environments in the world, surrounded by personnel whose job was to protect not just a building, but the very symbol of British sovereignty. The first sign of trouble came from the plainclothes security officers positioned throughout the crowd. Sergeant Mike Davies, a former SAS operative now working palace security, had been tracking Mitchell's movements through binoculars from his position in an unmarked van across the street. Davies immediately recognized the pre-attack indicators he had learned during counterterrorism training: target fixation, accelerating approach, and what experts call intention tremor, the slight shaking that occurs when someone is about to commit violence. "Control, this is Delta 7. Davies spoke quietly into his radio microphone. "I have a possible hostile approaching Guard Station 3. Male, approximately 28 years old, disheveled appearance, showing pre-attack indicators. Recommend immediate alert status." The palace's Central Security Command Center, located deep beneath the building, immediately shifted into high alert mode. Multiple screens showed feeds from dozens of surveillance cameras, while operators began coordinating response teams. The duty officer, Inspector Sarah Williams, a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Protection Units, took control of the situation. "All stations, we have a possible code yellow developing at Guard Station 3. Armed response teams to standby positions. Plainclothes units maintain observation and prepare for intervention." Mitchell was now 15 feet away from Thompson, close enough that the guard could see the desperation in his eyes. Thompson's training had prepared him for many scenarios: terrorist attacks, disturbed individuals, protesters, and even foreign intelligence operatives. What united all these threats was the need for measured, appropriate response that protected both the palace and innocent civilians. The crowd around them continued their normal activities, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding. A group of Japanese tourists posed for photos while a street musician played violin nearby. Children chased pigeons across the courtyard while their parents consulted guidebooks and maps. This peaceful scene was about to explode into chaos. Thompson's radio crackled with updates. "Guard Station 3, be advised we have eyes on your position. Possible hostile approach imminent. Maintain position and prepare for contact." At 10 feet away, Mitchell made his final commitment to the attack. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his hands formed fists, and his gait changed from uncertain shuffling to purposeful striding. These microsignals were immediately picked up by both Thompson and the surveillance teams monitoring the situation. Davies, still watching through binoculars, prepared to intervene. His hand moved to the concealed pistol under his jacket while he calculated the best approach route through the crowd. 20 years of military and police experience had taught him that situations like this could explode into violence within seconds, and innocent people could be hurt if the response wasn't perfectly executed. Thompson made a split-second decision that would determine the outcome of the entire incident. Instead of waiting passively for the attack, he chose to take control of the situation. As Mitchell lunged forward with both hands reaching for the SA-80 rifle, Thompson executed a defensive maneuver that his instructors had drilled into him thousands of times. The guard pivoted sharply on his left foot, pulling the rifle back and away from Mitchell's grasping hands while simultaneously bringing his right elbow around in a controlled arc. The movement was so quick and precise that most observers didn't immediately understand what had happened. Mitchell, committed to his forward momentum, found himself grabbing empty air while Thompson's defensive response caught him completely off balance. What followed happened in less than 3 seconds, but would be analyzed frame by frame in security briefings for years to come. Mitchell stumbled forward, his desperate grab missing its target entirely. Thompson's training took over completely as he transitioned from defensive movement to controlled restraint. The rifle remained securely in the guard's possession while Mitchell found himself face down on the cobblestones, Thompson's knee pressed firmly between his shoulder blades. The crowd's reaction was immediate, but varied. Some people screamed and backed away, while others moved closer to get a better view or start recording with their phones. Parents grabbed their children and moved towards safety, while other tourists seemed frozen in shock at the sudden transformation of the peaceful scene into something resembling a police arrest. Davies was moving through the crowd before Thompson had even completed his defensive maneuver. His trained eye assessed the situation as under control, but requiring immediate backup to manage the crowd and secure the area. Other plainclothes officers emerged from various positions around the palace, their presence becoming visible as the carefully orchestrated security response unfolded. Control, this is Delta 7. Hostile is down and restrained. Guard Station 3 has control, requesting uniform backup for crowd management and evidence preservation. The entire incident, from Mitchell's initial lunge to his restraint on the ground, had lasted less than 10 seconds. But those 10 seconds represented the collision between desperation and discipline, between poor judgment and professional training, between chaos and control. Within 30 seconds of Mitchell hitting the ground, the palace's security response machine shifted into full operation mode. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as metropolitan police vehicles converged on the scene from multiple directions. The crowd, initially shocked into momentary silence, began buzzing with excited chatter as people processed what they had just witnessed. Thompson maintained his position over Mitchell, keeping the suspect pinned while continuing to hold his rifle in a secure position. Despite the adrenaline coursing through his system, the young guard's training kept him focused on proper procedures. He spoke clearly into his radio microphone, reporting his status and requesting specific assistance while keeping his voice calm and professional. Control, Guard Station 3. Suspect is secure and showing no resistance. Require immediate police response for formal arrest. No injuries reported. Weapon remains secure. Inspector Williams coordinated the response from the command center, her screens showing multiple angles of the incident site. Camera feeds revealed the growing crowd of onlookers, the approach routes of emergency vehicles, and the positions of various security personnel now converging on the scene. Her 20 years of experience managing high-profile security incidents was evident in her calm, methodical approach to controlling what could easily become a chaotic situation. Davies reached Thompson's position first, his trained eye immediately assessing both the immediate threat level and the broader security implications. As he approached, he could see that Mitchell was conscious but appeared to be in some kind of emotional shock, his body limp and unresisting beneath Thompson's control. "Well done, Corporal," Davies said quietly, kneeling beside the restrained suspect. "I'll take over physical control. You maintain weapon security." The transfer was executed smoothly, with Davies applying professional restraint techniques while Thompson stepped back to resume a modified guard position. This coordination between different security elements demonstrated the extensive cross-training and cooperation that existed within the palace's protection network. Mitchell's capture had revealed several concerning factors that would later become part of the investigation. His clothes contained no identification documents, but searchers found small bags of what appeared to be illegal drugs, a considerable amount of cash in small bills, and a handwritten note with an address and phone number. These items suggested connections to London's criminal underworld that would require further investigation. The first police vehicles arrived exactly 4 minutes after the initial alert, their emergency lights casting red and blue reflections off the palace's windows. Detective Sergeant Rachel Morrison, a specialist in terrorism-related crimes, took charge of the scene. Her expertise in threat assessment and criminal psychology would prove crucial in determining whether Mitchell's actions represented a broader security concern. "I need this area secured immediately," Morrison announced as she surveyed the scene. "All witnesses to remain available for statements. I want the immediate area photographed before anything is disturbed further." The crowd management challenge was significant. Nearly 300 people now surrounded the incident site, many holding up phones to record video. Social media posts were already beginning to appear, and news organizations were dispatching camera crews to the scene. The balance between maintaining security and managing public relations required careful coordination. Thompson, still at his post but now with additional security backup, provided his initial statement to Detective Morrison. His account was precise and professional, reflecting both his military training and the shock of actually having to use his skills in defense of his position. "The suspect approached my position in an aggressive manner, showing clear intent to grab my weapon," Thompson reported. "I followed defensive protocols exactly as trained, neutralizing the threat while maintaining weapon security and minimizing harm to the suspect and surrounding civilians." Morrison's initial interview with Mitchell revealed the depth of his desperation and the flawed thinking that had led to his attack. Speaking in rambling, sometimes incoherent sentences, Mitchell described mounting debts, threats from criminal associates, and a belief that obtaining a weapon would somehow solve his problems. His statements would later be used as evidence of premeditation in the criminal proceedings against him. "I just needed something, anything to make them leave me alone," Mitchell told Morrison during his preliminary interview. "I thought if I had a gun, they would listen to me. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. I just needed them to back off." The investigation team immediately began checking Mitchell's background through various databases. His criminal history revealed a pattern of increasingly desperate behavior over the previous 2 years, including arrests for theft, drug possession, and harassment. This escalation pattern was typical of individuals spiraling toward more serious criminal acts. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist called to assess Mitchell's mental state, found clear evidence of substance abuse, depression, and what appeared to be early-stage psychotic symptoms. Her evaluation would become crucial in determining both his fitness for trial and the appropriate criminal charges to file. The suspect shows classic signs of someone whose judgment has been severely compromised by multiple stressors, Dr. Rodriguez reported to the investigation team. However, his actions show clear premeditation and understanding of consequences. He knew he was attempting to steal a weapon from a military guard. The palace's public relations team worked quickly to manage the story's impact on public perception. Their statement, released within 2 hours of the incident, emphasized the professionalism of the security response while reassuring the public that normal palace operations would continue without interruption. Today's incident demonstrates the high level of training and professionalism maintained by all personnel responsible for palace security, the statement read. The situation was resolved quickly and safely with no injuries to any palace staff, security personnel, or members of the public. Media coverage of the incident varied widely in tone and accuracy. Some outlets focused on the security implications and the effectiveness of the response, while others sensationalized the drama of the confrontation. International news services picked up the story, with particular interest from American and European media organizations. Thompson's commanding officer, Major Robert Sterling, visited the scene to personally debrief his soldier and assess the incident's impact on Guard operations. Sterling, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, recognized the psychological effects that such confrontations could have even on well-trained personnel. "You handled this exactly as you were trained," Sterling told Thompson during their private conversation. "Your quick thinking and proper execution prevented what could have been a much more serious incident." The entire regiment should be proud of your performance today. The ripple effects of Mitchell's failed attack extended far beyond the immediate incident. Security protocols were reviewed and updated. Guard training was enhanced to address similar scenarios, and coordination between different security elements was refined based on lessons learned from the response. The legal proceedings against James Mitchell began within hours of his arrest, setting in motion a complex judicial process that would examine not only his actions but also the broader security implications of his attack on a royal guard. The Crown Prosecution Service, recognizing the serious nature of the charges, assigned their most experienced terrorism and security specialists to handle the case. Mitchell was formally charged with attempted robbery, assault on a police officer, possession of controlled substances, and, under the Terrorism Act, for attempting to seize a weapon from a military installation. The combination of charges carried a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years in prison, reflecting both the severity of his actions and the symbolic importance of the target he had chosen. Detective Chief Inspector James Harrison, head of the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crimes Unit, led the comprehensive investigation into Mitchell's background and potential connections. What they discovered painted a picture of a man whose life had spiraled completely out of control, but also revealed concerning connections to organized criminal networks operating in London. The investigation uncovered that Mitchell's £3,000 debt was owed to Marcus Webb, a mid-level drug dealer with connections to several violent criminal organizations. Webb's operation supplied drugs throughout South London and was known for using extreme intimidation tactics against debtors. Phone records showed that Webb had been calling Mitchell repeatedly in the days leading up to the Palace incident, with conversations becoming increasingly threatening. Webb's organization has a history of escalating pressure tactics, explained Detective Harrison during a briefing with Palace security officials. They start with verbal threats, move to physical intimidation, and ultimately resort to serious violence. Mitchell was clearly desperate enough to believe that obtaining a weapon was his only option for survival. The forensic analysis of Mitchell's belongings revealed additional troubling information. The handwritten note found in his pocket contained not only Webb's contact information, but also what appeared to be a crude map of the palace grounds with guard positions marked. This suggested that Mitchell had been planning his attack for several days, conducting surveillance and reconnaissance before making his attempt. Dr. Rodriguez's psychological evaluation, completed over several sessions, provided crucial insight into Mitchell's mental state during the weeks leading up to his attack. Her report documented severe anxiety, depression, and paranoid thoughts that had been exacerbated by drug use and the constant stress of avoiding his creditors. Mr. Mitchell was functioning in a state of sustained crisis, Dr. Rodriguez wrote in her official report. His cognitive ability was severely impaired by stress, substance abuse, and fear. However, he retained sufficient understanding of his actions to constitute criminal responsibility for his choices. The trial preparation revealed the extent to which Palace security had been monitoring potential threats in the weeks before Mitchell's attack. Intelligence reports showed that several individuals with criminal backgrounds had been observed in the area, leading to increased surveillance and heightened alert status among security personnel. Lance Corporal Thompson faced his own challenges in the aftermath of the incident. While his actions had been completely appropriate and professionally executed, the psychological impact of using force against a civilian required careful management. Military counselors worked with Thompson to process the experience and ensure his continued effectiveness in his duties. It's important to understand that even when you do everything correctly, incidents like this can have lasting effects, explained Captain Sarah Mitchell, the regiment's welfare officer. Thompson showed remarkable composure and skill, but we need to ensure he receives proper support as he processes what happened. The Palace administration conducted a comprehensive review of security procedures in light of the incident. While the response had been effective, officials wanted to identify any potential improvements that could enhance future readiness. The review examined everything from guard positioning to crowd management protocols to coordination between different security elements. Inspector Williams led the security review process, drawing on her extensive experience in protection operations. Her team analyzed video footage frame by frame, interviewed all personnel involved, and consulted with security experts from other high-profile installations around the world. What we learned is that our basic procedures work very well, Williams reported to Palace administration. However, we identified several areas where improved coordination could make our response even more effective. We're implementing enhanced training scenarios and updating our communication protocols. The media coverage of Mitchell's trial brought renewed attention to both palace security and the broader issues of drug addiction and criminal debt that had driven his desperate actions. Legal experts debated whether the terrorism-related charges were appropriate, while social commentators examined the societal failures that had led to Mitchell's downward spiral. Mitchell's defense attorney, Sarah Chun, argued that her client's actions were driven by mental illness and desperation rather than any genuine intent to commit terrorism or harm royal family members. Chin's strategy focused on securing treatment for Mitchell's addiction and mental health issues while acknowledging the serious nature of his actions. My client made a terrible decision while in the grip of severe psychological distress, Chin argued during pretrial hearings. He poses no ongoing threat to public safety and would benefit more from intensive rehabilitation than from lengthy imprisonment. The prosecution, led by Sir David Hartwell QC, maintained that Mitchell's actions represented a serious breach of national security that required substantial punishment to deter similar incidents. Hartwell's case emphasized the premeditated nature of Mitchell's planning and the potential consequences if he had been successful in obtaining the guard's weapon. Webb, the drug dealer whose threats had driven Mitchell to desperation, was arrested 2 weeks after the palace incident as part of a larger operation against his criminal network. His organization was found to be responsible for numerous violent incidents across South London, including several cases where debtors had been seriously injured or killed. The investigation into Webb's operation revealed the systematic way in which drug dealers exploited vulnerable individuals like Mitchell, using debt as a tool of control and escalating pressure tactics that often drove victims to commit serious crimes. This pattern had implications far beyond Mitchell's individual case. Home Secretary Patricia Williams announced new initiatives to address the intersection of drug debt and security threats, recognizing that desperate individuals could pose risks to high-profile targets across the country. The palace incident had highlighted vulnerabilities in the system that protected not just royal residences, but other critical infrastructure as well. We must address the root causes that drive individuals to such desperate acts, Williams stated during a parliamentary briefing. Enhanced security measures are important, but we also need better intervention systems to identify and help people before they reach the point of attempting violent crimes. The trial of James Mitchell became a landmark case in British legal history, establishing important precedents for how courts would handle future incidents involving attacks on royal security personnel. The proceedings took place at the Old Bailey, London's most prestigious criminal court, befitting the serious nature of the charges and the international attention the case had attracted. On the opening day of the trial, the courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public who had followed the case since the dramatic incident at Buckingham Palace 6 months earlier. Judge Sir William Pemberton, known for his expertise in terrorism and security-related cases, presided over proceedings that would last 3 weeks and examined every aspect of Mitchell's actions and motivations. Lance Corporal Thompson, now promoted to full corporal in recognition of his exemplary service, testified as the primary witness for the prosecution. His appearance in court, wearing his dress uniform with newly earned commendations, provided a stark contrast to the disheveled defendant who had attacked him outside the palace gates. The defendant's approach was clearly aggressive and purposeful, Thompson testified during his examination by the prosecution. His body language, facial expression, and movement pattern all indicated hostile intent. My training prepared me to recognize these threat indicators and respond appropriately. The defense team's strategy focused heavily on Mitchell's mental state and the circumstances that had driven him to attempt such a desperate act. They called expert witnesses to testify about the effects of drug addiction, criminal intimidation, and psychological pressure on decision-making capabilities. Dr. Rodriguez, whose evaluation had been crucial in the investigation, provided detailed testimony about Mitchell's psychological condition during the weeks leading up to his attack. Her analysis painted a picture of a man whose judgment had been severely compromised by multiple stressors acting simultaneously. Mr. Mitchell was experiencing what we term psychological overwhelm, DR. Rodriguez explained to the jury. The combination of drug withdrawal, constant fear, sleep deprivation, and mounting pressure from creditors had severely impaired his ability to think rationally about consequences or alternatives. The prosecution's case was methodically built around evidence of premeditation and the serious threat Mitchell's actions had posed to public safety. Sir David Hartwell presented surveillance footage showing Mitchell conducting reconnaissance of the palace over several days before his attack, undermining defense claims that his actions were impulsive. This was not a moment of madness, Hartwell argued in his opening statement. The defendant spent days planning this attack, studying guard positions, and preparing to steal a military weapon from one of our most important national institutions. The potential consequences of success could have been catastrophic. The trial heard dramatic testimony from Marcus Webb, the drug dealer whose threats had driven Mitchell to desperation. Webb, testifying under immunity in exchange for his cooperation, described the systematic intimidation tactics used against debtors and the escalating violence that typically followed non-payment. Mitchell was scared, really scared, Webb testified. But that's the point. Fear makes people pay up. I never told him to attack any guards or steal weapons. That was his own stupid idea. Webb's testimony revealed the brutal reality of London's drug debt collection system, where vulnerable individuals were routinely threatened with violence, had their families menaced, and were driven to increasingly desperate measures to satisfy their creditors. This context provided crucial background for understanding Mitchell's state of mind. The palace security review, completed during the trial preparation, was presented as evidence of the incident's broader implications. Inspector Williams testified about the security enhancements implemented following Mitchell's attack, demonstrating the serious ongoing impact of his actions on national security protocols. Every security incident forces us to examine our procedures and identify potential vulnerabilities, Williams explained to the court. While our response was effective, Mr. Mitchell's attack highlighted areas where we needed to enhance our readiness for similar threats. Character witnesses for Mitchell painted a picture of a man whose life had gradually deteriorated due to addiction and poor choices, but who had never previously shown violent tendencies. Former employers, family members, and friends described someone who had once been reliable and kind before drugs destroyed his judgment and stability. Mitchell's sister, Emma, provided particularly emotional testimony about watching her brother's decline and her failed attempts to get him help. Her account illustrated the broader social failures that had contributed to his desperate circumstances. I tried everything to help James, Emma testified through tears. I offered him money, places to stay, help getting treatment. But the addiction was stronger than anything I could do. I never imagined he would do something like this. The jury deliberations lasted 2 full days as members wrestled with balancing sympathy for Mitchell's circumstances against the serious nature of his actions and their potential consequences. The complexity of the case required careful consideration of multiple factors including intent, mental capacity, premeditation, and public safety implications. When the verdict was finally announced, Mitchell was found guilty on all charges except the most serious terrorism-related counts. The jury accepted that while his actions were premeditated and dangerous, they were motivated by personal desperation rather than any intent to harm the royal family or commit acts of terrorism. Judge Pemberton sentenced Mitchell to 8 years in prison, with requirements for drug treatment and psychological counseling throughout his incarceration. The sentence reflected both the serious nature of his actions and recognition of the circumstances that had driven him to commit the crime. Your actions that day posed a serious threat to public safety and national security, Judge Pemberton stated during sentencing. However, the court recognizes that your judgment was severely impaired by addiction and external pressure. This sentence aims to protect the public while providing you with opportunities for rehabilitation. The broader implications of Mitchell's case extended far beyond his individual punishment. His attack prompted comprehensive reviews of security procedures at royal residences, government buildings, and other high-profile installations across the United Kingdom. Enhanced training programs were developed to help security personnel identify and respond to similar threats. The Home Office announced new initiatives to address the intersection of drug addiction, criminal debt, and security threats. These programs aim to identify vulnerable individuals before they reach the point of attempting violent crimes against critical infrastructure or high-profile targets. Mitchell's story also sparked important conversations about mental health support, addiction treatment, and the social safety nets needed to prevent desperate individuals from making catastrophic decisions. Policymakers recognized that effective security required addressing root causes as well as implementing physical protective measures. 3 years later, Mitchell was released on parole after demonstrating significant progress in addressing his addiction and mental health issues. He entered a supervised rehabilitation program and began working with organizations helping other individuals struggling with similar challenges. Lance Corporal Thompson, now Sergeant Thompson, continued his distinguished military career and became an instructor in guard procedures and threat assessment. His professional handling of Mitchell's attack became a case study taught to new recruits and security personnel worldwide. The incident at Buckingham Palace served as a powerful reminder that even the most secure locations remain vulnerable to determined individuals, but also demonstrated that proper training, quick thinking, and coordinated response could effectively neutralize such threats while minimizing harm to all involved. The legacy of that dramatic morning continues to influence security protocols and training procedures, ensuring that the lessons learned from one man's desperate mistake contribute to protecting the institutions and symbols that define British democracy and heritage.